Your baby is crying right now, and you are doing what every parent does. You are counting the seconds. You are scanning the mental checklist: hunger, gas, fatigue, overstimulation, moving through each one with the focused desperation of someone defusing a small, very loud bomb. But here is what nobody told you when you were handed that baby. The sound itself, the pitch, the rhythm, the way it builds and pauses and rebuilds, is not just noise, it is data. Researchers who have spent decades recording, analyzing, and mapping those sounds have found something that will change the way you understand what you are listening to. This is not about what your baby needs in this moment. This is about who your baby already is. And the evidence has been sitting in plain hearing for decades. Most parents assume crying is a language of needs. The baby is hungry, so the baby cries. The baby is in pain, so the baby cries differently. That is partly true. There is real science showing that hunger, cries, and pain cries have different acoustic signatures, and experienced parents do pick up on those differences over time. But the needs theory runs into a wall the moment you ask a simple question. Why do two babies of the same age, in the same environment, fed on the same schedule, cry in completely different ways? One cries in short, rhythmic bursts and settles quickly. Another cries in long, unbroken arcs that rise and fall, like something composed. The needs theory cannot answer that. The sound, it turns out, is not only about the moment. It is a window into the nervous system underneath. Most parents respond to crying in one of two ways. They either rush in immediately to fix the source, or they wait, hoping it will resolve on its own. Both responses are reasonable. Neither one is wrong, but both treat the cry as a problem to solve, rather than a signal to read. And when researchers started treating it as a signal, the findings got genuinely strange. Strange enough that pediatric, neuroscientists, and developmental psychologists began arguing that the cry is one of the earliest measurable expressions of who a child is becoming. Months before a single word, months before a social smile, months before any test you could administer in a clinical setting. Barry Lester at Brown University has been studying infant cry acoustics since the 1970s. His work, published across decades in journals including Infant Behavior and Development, established something foundational. The acoustic structure of a cry is directly coordinated by the central nervous system. What that means is the cry is not just a reaction, it is a readout. The pitch, the duration, the pause patterns, the way the cry rises toward its peak and then either sustains or collapses, all of it reflects the neurological state of the infant producing it. Lester's research showed that cries with a higher fundamental frequency, what the human ear perceives as a sharper, more piercing pitch, were associated with differences in temperament in otherwise healthy newborns. Typical infant cries range in fundamental frequency from roughly 400 to 650 hertz. Cries that break above 1,000 hertz, what researchers call hyperphonated cries, appear in infants whose nervous systems are under greater strain or whose baseline arousal is set significantly higher than average. The cry was not diagnosing illness, it was profiling organization. The difference between a relatively easy infant and a harder to soothe one was audible from the first weeks of life. Researcher L.C. Huffman and colleagues published a study in Infant Behavior and Development in 1994, examining the link between cry acoustics and maternal ratings of temperament across the first 12 weeks of life in healthy, full-term infants. What they found was that specific acoustic features of the cry correlated meaningfully with how mothers described their babies' temperaments over that same period. Infants whose cries showed certain patterns, particularly higher pitch variability and longer sustained cry episodes, were rated as more negative in mood, less adaptable, and harder to soothe. A separate earlier study by Lounsbury and Bates, published in Child Development in 1982, played recorded cries of infants rated as easy, average, or difficult in temperament to adult listeners who had no prior knowledge of the babies. The listeners consistently rated the cries of difficult temperament infants as more aversive, more urgent, and more irritating, even when they had no information about the baby behind the recording. The acoustic signature of temperament was not just measurable by instruments, it was readable by human perception without any context at all. Most parents hear this and feel a quiet dread, wondering if a difficult cry means a difficult child. But the research does not say that. It says the cry is a baseline, and what happens next depends almost entirely on what the caregiver does with that signal. Research published in Pediatric Research in 2019 by a team at UCLA, led by Dr. Ariana Anderson, used machine learning to analyze the acoustic features of over 6,000 infant cries submitted through the Chatterbaby app. The system was trained to distinguish pain cries, hunger cries, and fussy cries, and it correctly identified pain cries more than 90% of the time. But what made this work remarkable was not the accuracy. It was what the acoustic consistency revealed about the individual infant. The team found that cry features were stable within individual babies across different emotional triggers. Each baby had, in effect, a cry fingerprint. The pitch profile, the rhythm, the specific way their cry rose and fell stayed consistent even as the cause of the cry changed entirely. That consistency is not random. It reflects the underlying neural architecture producing the sound. And a stable, identifiable neural architecture in the first months of life is one of the earliest observable correlates of what developmental psychologists would later measure as emotional regulation capacity. The same neural circuits that shape how a baby cries are the circuits that will later shape how a child handles frustration, novelty, and social challenge. Now, here is where the research turns from fascinating to urgent. A series of studies using data from nearly 400 families examined crying persistence at 3 months of age as a predictor of later social development. The results, drawn from research based on polyvagal theory, the framework developed by Stephen Porges, linking the vagus nerve to the social engagement system, found that infants who cried more persistently at 3 months were more likely to show attachment stress in their caregivers. That stress, in turn, predicted poorer social relatedness by the time the child was 2 years old. A related finding was even more specific. Children who avoided strangers in the lab at 24 months had shown more acoustically unstable cries as infants at 3 months. The cry was not causing the later social difficulty. It was signaling a nervous system that would need more deliberate support to build the scaffolding for social connection. The window between birth and 6 months is not simply a phase of survival and feeding schedules. It is a critical period of neural calibration, and the cry is the instrument playing in real time while that calibration is happening. A 2015 study published in BMC Pediatrics found that excessive crying at 3 months was associated with significantly elevated rates of behavioral problems at 4 years of age, including hyperactivity and emotional difficulties, reinforcing that the cry in early infancy is not just a temporary phase, but an early signal of a developmental trajectory worth paying attention to. Here is what to watch for, and why the timing matters more than most pediatric advice acknowledges. A cry that is consistently very high-pitched, that does not de-escalate with soothing across the first 3 months, or that shows little variability in rhythm over time, is not a sign of a bad baby or a failing parent. It is a sign that the nervous system is working hard, and it is asking for more input, not less. Research from developmental literature is clear that infants with high-pitched or hyperphonated cries in less responsive caregiving environments showed progressively lower cognitive scores over time, more withdrawn temperament patterns, and measurably less quality interaction with their mothers through at least 3 years of age. The same infants in more responsive environments did not show those outcomes. The cry flags the need. The response is the intervention. Responsiveness does not mean solving the crying immediately every single time. It means being present, consistent, and engaged in a way the infant's nervous system can register. If you are worried that your baby's cry sounds different, that it is unusually high, unusually persistent, or that it does not settle the way books and other parents suggest it should, talk to your pediatrician. Not because something is necessarily wrong, but because catching a nervous system that needs more support at 3 months is incomparably easier than catching it at 3 years. Your instinct that something sounds different is a signal worth trusting. You started this video counting seconds, running the checklist, trying to decode a sound that felt like pure urgency with no information inside it. But there is information inside it. The pitch tells you about the nervous system. The persistence tells you about the temperament taking shape. The rhythm, the pauses, the way the cry builds and then releases, that is not chaos. That is a person trying to communicate before they have any other tool to do it with. Your baby is not just asking you for something. Your baby is already telling you something about who they are. The cry is not a malfunction. The cry is the first sentence. If you want to stay connected to science-backed content about early development that most parenting advice never touches, subscribe to this channel. Now, here is something I genuinely want to know. Have you ever noticed a specific pattern in how your baby cries that seemed completely unique to them? Something no chart or app or guide quite explained? Tell me in the comments what it sounded like and whether you ever figured out what it meant.